Hello and welcome everyone to Silent Podcast, where we are anything but silent. Today, I am very excited to have the privilege to speak with a contestant from a very entertaining, exciting, drama-filled new reality TV show from Netflix called Outlast. So as you can see here, I'm here with Joel Hungate. Joel, thank you so much for being here to speak with me today.
Oh, what a pleasure. And so excited to talk about all things Outlast, to answer questions, and dive a little deeper because it's generating a lot of conversation, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a conversation. Absolutely. I've had some plenty of great conversations within my own family and little circle here. And I've also seen plenty of, I'll say, colorful conversations online because this really was uh, I will say, a reality TV show does not usually make this kind of splash on its first season, and you guys had quite the first season here. So, what we're gonna do, we're just gonna chat. I have some questions, a few from some people that sent me in, as well as my own. And again, Joel, this is for you, just to share from your experience and just share, anything that wasn't on the show. We'd love to hear any, behind the scenes tidbits or things that weren't covered. But also, we'd love to hear your take on all the things we did see. So first, I would just love to hear what drew you to this kind of, this show. Obviously, it's some kind of combination of Alone, but there's a social aspect, kind of like a Survivor. So I just would really love to know, like, how you found out about it, and then how you, what really for you felt like, okay, this is me. This is calling my name.
Oh, yes. So I'm a mountaineer, and that's what I do, outside of my professional endeavors and things like that. I've always been drawn to the intensity of that experience, right? And it slowly builds over time. I mean, you start to think, wow, I'm going to put myself into even more wild settings with wild people doing incredible things. And when I saw the call out for this, asking for folks that were either mountaineers, extreme endurance athletes, adventurers of any sort, I thought, man, that is something that I need to throw my hat into the ring for. In particular, whenever you're out mountaineering or you're kind of pushing the envelope, and we've done first ascents all over the world, been a part of month-long expeditions, laying siege to unclimbed mountains, you're always in the back of your mind asking that question, who do you become and what can you put up with? What is that threshold for adversity? And a setting like this was fascinating to me, where that was the core tenet of the game. One of the most unimaginably inhospitable environments out there. Couple that with the team-based component, the survival side of things. Count me in. That sounds fantastic. So that's what drew me to the show.
Okay, so that leads into my next question perfectly, which is, what did you know about the show, like, heading in? So you knew that I was obviously this, again, adventure outdoor, like you're going to be a survivalist out there, but did you know too much about the game, the rules, the social aspect? I'd love to hear, what your mindset was. How did you prepare going into it?
Yeah. No, for me, it was all about the ambiguity was fascinating in the game. It was the idea that, hey, they're very minimal, very simple rules. You're going to be dropped into Southeast Alaska, this incredibly trying environment, and you're going to be forced to collaborate on a team with all these lone wolves. That's pretty much all we knew. We had very little insight into what the day was going to look like, what challenges or the gameplay structure was going to be, what were the twists and turns that awaited us. So almost the unknown itself was kind of a draw towards the concept. But I just thought it was such a nuanced take on the traditional adventure survival motif that we're all used to in the reality TV space.
Yeah, absolutely. And it produced a TV product that was definitely unique in that space as well. So let's get into it. So day one, I mean, you go through the casting process, you get selected. I'm sure you're very excited. You get flown out there. I'm assuming there's, a couple days while you're quarantined, or you're not speaking to the rest of the cast. Is that how it is?
Oh, yeah. Now, for something like this, you end up getting on location. I was laughing, go through this entire process to finally get the nod to say, hey, you're either part of the cast or you're a substitute, one of the two. But we need you in Juneau, Alaska by this date in September. Can you make it? And away you go. Next thing you know, you're on an airplane and you're touching down. You have no idea what you're getting into. And they do, of course, for something like this, go to great lengths to keep us not only safe and sequestered throughout that entire process, especially in the throes of the pandemic, but also you're really insulated from the staff, the team, the show, to the point where we really were dropped into the wilderness, meeting these strangers essentially for the first time. And then the dynamics of the gameplay really took off from there. So it was fascinating, to land in Juneau, not knowing what you're getting into, but then also trying to think, well, how do I prepare for this mentally, physically, that sort of thing? Because there's just a really interesting dynamic that's waiting to happen there, which to me is how on earth do you prepare physically, mentally, emotionally? Do you put on weight? Do you stay physically fit? Do you start working on what kind of survival skills, when, where, and why, and how? And that's the sort of thing that I think is rattling through all of our brains as we're getting ready for the show.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. The ambiguity, because this is season 1. There's no template to work off of. So I'm sure. Did you err on the side of putting on some pounds? It didn't look like you. Okay. Because you did not look like you came in with a lot out there.
I know. If I could change one thing, I would have come in with more weight. Now for anybody keeping track at home. I showed up, I put on 15 pounds before I got there.
Okay.
Now imagine you're trying to balance adding 15 pounds with keeping up your cardiovascular endurance and my strength training. And for me, very, very focused on the physical fitness component, the nutrition component, just in general in life for the things I do from an endurance or mountaineering or just athletic standpoint. But this was a unique challenge. How do you put on that weight, but also keep that level of fitness that you think you're going to have to tap into, because you just don't know what you're going to get into. Is it going to be challenge based? Is it more endurance and mentally, more mentally taxing? Is it all of the above? So I was trying to figure all of that out, but I was very thankful for the extra 15 pounds because by the time I got out of there, I lost 25 pounds.
Wow.
Being in the wilderness over that amount of time. It was crazy.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I've seen your TikTok videos. Everyone should check them out. But you made a few jokes about having some PTSD whenever you see some mussels, because that was your main diet out there, was those mussels.
Oh yeah. Well, and stay tuned for my self-proclaimed memoir of mountaineer survivalist finds himself on reality TV. I was going to call it Muscle Memories. But I seriously, I laugh and it's funny. It did actually take me by surprise. One of the memes that you're referencing on the TikTok, I had this kind of flashback to Nika Bay where you order paella, just sitting in a restaurant, you don't think of it. And then it comes out, replete with mussels circling the whole thing. And I'm like, oh man, I don't know if I want to see another mussel again.
That's very fair. Yeah. Very fair. You've earned that right to never eat another mussel again. So day one, let's get into it though. Day one, you get dropped off. You don't know really what's going on. Obviously parachute drops and it looks like, very Hunger Games-esque with this cornucopia of, just, you don't know what you're walking up to. And, it says break into teams and, kind of just get started. There wasn't really much more than that. But was there anything from forming Delta that we missed there that you'd like to fill us in on?
Oh, one of the things I think, and we look back at this and laugh how it just worked out. You'll notice if you watch it, Jordan and I are standing right next to each other and we were connecting. A lot of us were, obviously we're getting out to the environment. You're able to kind of connect in the woods. You're wondering where you're going to go, what's going to happen next. You hear the drop. You all start moving towards that very Hunger Games-esque supply drop. And I'm standing next to Jordan. We're listening to everything. And they're like divided into teams. And we're sitting there. Yeah, it's cool. Can't wait to see that happen. And they're like, no, now. so he and I are looking around. Everybody else is pulling each other into teams. And we just look at each other and go, all right, man.
Okay.
One of the things that I think was kind of rolling in the background right off the bat when we, Jordan and I just got left standing around and then we said, oh, okay, we're not freaking out, grabbing at people, whatever. We end up having Paul and Dawn come over and we all start talking right away. And we start to realize that, wow, we may have just lucked out by being the folks that just kind of stood around, kind of cool as cucumbers, all of a sudden be, saying, hey, what do you do? What do you know? And one of the things I think that we had a lot of questions on, people said, well, hey, why didn't anybody take the bag or the parachute or the paracord or any of that stuff?
Yeah.
Delta team did. So one of the things that I thought was fascinating, right off the bat, we had that mindset of, oh, hey, we just happened into a team, but everybody knew the game was on Delta Team, and we started right away with grabbing the big bag, getting whatever supplies we could take with us beyond just the initial supply drop.
Yeah.
And that paid dividends in setting up our initial shelter, and for just the incredibly difficult weather and environment we had over those first 4 or so days.
Yeah. Yeah. So then you go back, you build your camp, you got your squad. It's you, Jordan, Paul, and Don. And really, it seems like you guys this is where I would imagine most people are getting the experience on the show that they thought was going to happen. It's going to be rough out there. You're surviving, you're on your teams. And then it seems like the first real thing that happens from you from the show's perspective was the challenge where you had to build the raft and go get those crab pots down the river.
Yes.
Was there any sort of other challenge? Because I think what was surprising for me watching was there were so few challenges. Like there was not very much structure at all. So was that really the first one? And was that really the only main one until the end of the game?
There's a lot of things, obviously tons of content, interesting survival things, really ingenious and creative stuff happening all in the background. And of course, not all of it can make it in for a variety of reasons to the final product. But going on in the background, there's everything from the fact that we were harvesting so many mussels, we were essentially farming them, and I was having them filter our water. We're obviously testing for paralytic shellfish toxin and all of that stuff. So you got to be safe for anybody out there that wants to do that. Don't just go grabbing mussels. That's not the way to do it. But everything from even how we collected water. Just some interesting tidbits on that front. So much rain, and we started to find these natural cisterns, essentially, where the rain was collecting in the grassland, the muskeg, in and around our camp. And we actually lined some of that with rocks and grass and started to collect the rainwater, where I could literally walk out of my tent in the morning, stretch my arms, sneak over to the little cistern and scoop out a cup of fresh rainwater. It's probably the best water I've ever had. Everything from that to how we're sourcing firewood and setting traps and trying to build reflectors using avalanche bags and all this stuff. Really just cool stuff happening. Obviously, that's the blocking and tackling for survival. Not that it didn't move the show along, but just for some context, all of that's kind of swirling in the background.
Yeah.
In addition to, I'm an engineer, and it was shown on the top of the show. It's like, my bona fides as an engineer are going to be in question if this shelter doesn't rock and this raft isn't fantastic. So
I
don't want Purdue to revoke my degree if they see something that's not going to be.
I feel like that was emphasized on the edit, was how well your shelter was built compared to the other teams. I think that was the show made it seem like you guys had the best shelter out there.
We had a killer shelter, and I think it was the difference, especially in the early going, with one of the things that's easy to just kind of gloss over, how bad the weather was in the first handful of days. And I'll say that as a testament to any of the folks that tapped out early. Like, that was not just some, hey, we're sleeping in the woods and it's a little cold and a little wet. I mean, there was some severe weather going on. To the point where we were wondering, like, oh my gosh, is it going to affect our ability to actually continue with the show? Which was fascinating to see everybody kind of gritted out through that. But those are some gritty people. And to have folks say, you know what, enough's enough. Alaska's tough. I'm out of here. I think it's a testament to how bad the weather really was in the early going. And then secondly, how fantastic our shelter ended up being for Jordan, Don, Paul, and I, because it really allowed us to thrive as a team of 4, really adopt roles, keep morale high, because we weren't worried about water running into our shelter, keeping the rain off. We stayed fairly comfortable in the early going. I say fairly, it was still pretty rough, but it was a lot easier mentally. And then keeping the fire going, we tried to keep it going 24/7, both as a psychological thing for other teams to kind of see that and say, wow, these guys are really on top of that. But also just the ease of use, collecting firewood, not having to worry about starting it in a wet environment. Some of those strategies were starting to form right before that first challenge actually happened.
Got it. Okay. Well, that makes sense. I love the context. That's what we're here for. So let's roll into it, though. That first challenge happens. You're tasked with building a raft. You're, I'm sure, very, very enticed by the prospect of getting some crab pots to actually get some real protein in there in your diet. And I guess my biggest question from how it was presented on the show was, exactly the race between Jordan and Angie, was it as depicted? Because that was a beautiful underdog, moment from her catching up, lapping him while he's doing some push-ups out there on the raft, looking like he's very, very confident in his lead to get there. But yeah, I would just love to know if that's really how it went down. How did you feel seeing him do some push-ups and then get lapped by her? Those are kind of the questions that were swirling in my head as I was watching.
No, it went down pretty much as you saw it. I mean, the craft that we built, wildly substantial. I mean, and definitely a 4-person team craft to move that bad boy around, every bit of 300 pounds by the time it was all said and done, waterlogged. That was a lot of wood. I mean, almost 3 to 4 full standing trees that we had to fell and buck up and mess around to create that thing. So we knew the raft could get us there. It was substantial. And we were really bullish on Jordan's experience on that front, with what he's done in the water, the ability, hey, if you had to be in it, if you have to swim or whatever, hey, you seem to have the most confidence in that setting. So we were happy to kind of christen the Outlast Outcast craft and send it on its way with Jordan at the helm. And what was funny, we watched for a little bit as they rounded the bend. We saw him doing the push-ups and stuff, and he had a substantial lead. But man, major kudos to Angie, Seth, and Nick, because for a while I didn't know that their craft was going to make it out of the water. And that was really the thing that they were balancing. As soon as they set it down, it would sit into the water a certain depth. So if you put too much weight on it, you're going to be plowing water the entire time. So it made a lot of sense for Angie to hop in and start to pilot that thing. But what happened next? Jordan's cruising, and there's a very, very real, almost unavoidable current if you end up just to the left of the island. Yeah. And you had to make that choice. Do I try to jog left or right? It's hard to see the current, and he just so happened to veer the wrong direction. And once you're in it, you are not fighting it. We had nothing. No, there's no paddles. There's no jumping in and swimming. I mean, you are in the bay after that's done. So you miss the island completely. So that cost us quite a bit. I mean, the amount of calories we missed out on by having that jog around the island and not being able to hit those crab pots and get there first and maybe have a strategic advantage in taking more of the pots to get more of that sustenance and be able to barter and trade with the other teams for other supplies, things like that. It really kind of threw a wrench in what I thought at the time was a pretty commanding lead that Delta team had.
Yeah. Okay. So you're feeling pretty good at that point. And then the next hit comes, which is really Jordan's Medevac as well. So I know this is weeks later, or I think at least a week, right? About 2 weeks that he's feeling sick, and then helicoptered out of there. And you all are told that he might return, might not return. I just would love to hear, your perspective, because then obviously that sets off. This is the first domino that really sets off everything that happens. The most dramatic moments really fall right after Jordan leaves, because that's when Paul leaves, and the story, but we'll get into it. But I just would love to know, what was your experience on the other side of him being helicoptered out, waiting for an update, and then finally receiving it?
Oh, it was, Jordan was just working himself really hard out there. And that was one of the things that Paul and I had a lot of discussions about. And, he's just a hard charger. He's going to go, he's moving, he's building, he's bringing a lot of rocks back and forth to our shelter. And that's every bit of a couple 100 yards to go from where we set up camp away from the river and the bay area all the way back. And he's taking these big rocks, bringing them back, building our fireplace that eventually ended up kind of being our reflector stove. Pretty substantial fire pit that we built in and around the shelter. So we're telling him, hey man, you might have to slow down. And he's like, no, I got it. So you get a break from doing that for a couple hours. No joke. Rests a little bit, get some water, and then he's out cutting firewood. And that's about the time that you start to see that catch up with him. We haven't had as many calories. We're still eating the mussels. And to eat the mussels, you boil them, you drink the broth after they've boiled enough to open. You boil them again, and you drink the broth again to get as many nutrients out of those mussels as humanly possible. Then you eat the mussel, right? But even that's not enough, even though we were capturing a lot of them. Not enough to keep up with the amount of calories that we were exerting out there. So all of that, coupled with kind of the dent that we had in morale from Jordan missing the island for the crab pots, I think really pushed him to work even harder at camp And then we kind of hit that inflection point where he passed out, whether from just low blood sugar, exhaustion, whatever it happened to be. But we were mostly worried about whether or not he hit his head on the way down. And that was at the heart of when Paul and we got him out of the woods and we got him to medical, and then we carried him to the medical evacuation in the skiff that they rolled up in. That was the biggest thing running through my mind, because I work in healthcare, that's my space. And you start to think about, okay, we've got some, whether it was get him something to help with blood sugar, get him some hydration, get him some food, whatever it happens to be. But then we got to start thinking about, well, did you hit your head on something, and what's that mean for what's next in the game for you? And that's running through our heads. And we spent the rest of the day back at camp, kind of awaiting the news, wondering, my gosh, did we just lose our buddy? It was terrible. And you saw that when they sent the message back in that he's not coming back into the game. It was a major turning point for Team Delta.
Yeah. So let's talk about that turning point, because it seems like the next morning, right? You wake up and there's only two of you in the shelter. So tell me, so Paul, he had a plan, and obviously it worked out for him in the end. But I would love to know what your experience was waking up next morning and he's gone.
Oh yeah. Oh, I know. Well, for us, Paul and I were getting pretty close, and I know I don't, as it goes with the game and your strategy, I would have no problem if you're making moves that you think are best for you, right? Dawn and I talked about moves. Everybody's talking about it. You're thinking about, well, how do I get 2 steps ahead of this? What rubbed me on that one was the leaving without any notice, without standing and saying, hey, listen, guys, I want to let you know I'm taking I'm taking my stuff and I'm going to head and I'm joining Charlie. And if it was handled that way, I would have said, hey, listen, what can we do to figure this out? How can we talk about this? We're still an incredibly strong team. We would have had an entirely different interaction than leaving for a little bit, going out, doing whatever it is that we're doing, fishing, trying to gather supplies, firewood, to come back and find that his stuff is just gone and he's absconded with some of the things that we were using as a team. And that's what rubbed Dawn and I the wrong way, and especially with some of the conversations that Paul and I had in and around that whole event. Like, we all knew that everybody was thinking, like, oh gosh, what do we do moving forward? What's the strategy here? Are we going to stick together as a team? Are we not? Are people looking elsewhere? And my ask to everybody on the team was, give us 2 days. Let's recenter. Let's reconnect. Let's hunker in. We've got a great thing going here. We've got incredible shelter, tons of supplies. We've got food. We've got water. We've really operated as a fantastic unit up to this point. Let's not throw that away. And what bothered me about that whole interaction was the way that came across was Paul and I's kind of gentleman's agreement was, okay, we're going to do that. And we'll hunker in. We'll see what happens, and figure this out. And then he was gone. And that's what kind of led to that interaction where I felt like it was a slap to Dawn and I. Just the way it was handled. Not that the choice was made. I don't begrudge anybody for making a gameplay choice. That's why we're out there. It's just the way that we do things. How you do anything is how you do everything. And that's kind of my mantra when it comes to integrity really being defined by whatever the worst behavior it is that you're willing to tolerate. And that's kind of at my heart for how we approached that entire situation, why it was so disappointing for me. And because I really like Paul, and we're still, again, there's no animosity, right? We're incredibly good terms, have the utmost respect for him, but that whole situation could have been handled completely differently.
Yeah. No, well, that's helpful to put us in your mindset, especially as it was happening. I mean, that's not surprising to hear, but it's helpful just to know some of that context. Did you feel like if you were going to guess at that point with down to 3, we see this in kind of game shows, when there's 3, there's always a 2 within the 3. Did you feel like it would have been you and Paul with Dawn on the outside? What did you feel like they were closer with each other, or were you closer to Dawn? I just would love to know if you really thought if it came down to it, who was the 2 within the 3 there?
Yeah, and I think that was part of it, is that the 2 and 2 within Delta when we were 4, we were all working together. We had tons of camaraderie, but it was Dawn and I were the closest and nearest and dearest of allies from the get-go. We just hit it off. We just had that relationship, kindred spirits, spent a lot of time together, really trusted one another. She was my just dearest ally naturally. It's just kind of, you're drawn to some people that way. And Paul and I and Jordan had similar things that were blossoming, just wasn't along as quickly as it was going with Don and I, for instance. Now, Paul and Jordan were the same in the opposite side, right? Those two were incredibly close. Again, we're all amicable, we're all working together, we all loved having each other on the team. But as you could see that if it came down to it and it said, hey, draw a line, you're breaking into two, Don and I were much closer. So when Jordan left, I think Paul felt that and saw that it was probably an opportunity for him to move to another team and maybe get a fresher start on that front now that we're kind of moving away from losing Jordan and what we felt like was this big flywheel of momentum that made us really, really hard to contend with relative to the other teams.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So I think now I really want to get into everything that happens next, because this is without what happens next, your show would not be a top 10 show on Netflix trending. I mean, the word of mouth that just I've experienced, that people sharing, you got to watch this show, is all about what happens on this episode 4 and beyond. So really, I know you guys go and you have, the confrontation with Charlie over there, with Paul, but then, you go back to camp and you and Don are trying to make it work. And you seem like you guys are, you're making it work. I'm sure it's definitely not as comfortable, to use your language, as it was before. But then, you come back to camp one day and your sleeping bags are gone. So take me through more just what happens at that point, because I mean, this is an iconic TV moment. This will be forever discussed. Justin in his ghillie suit, playing hide and go seek with your sleeping bags. So just, please tell me more about that experience.
Oh, that whole day. Oh, the context that we could give around that entire day and how things shook out. No, it was a one for us. And Dawn and I, there's kind of the double-edged sword, right? When you're down to 2, it's a mixed bag. One, it's a lot more work to just keep up with the day in, day out of firewood and food and all of that. So, but it's also less mouths to feed. So we're getting along, strategizing about what that next step is, whether we continue to align and work nicely with Charlie. Do we continue to build our relationship with Javier and Brian? Because we've all, in and around, again, things that just don't make it onto camera because of just time and stuff like that. You're seeing them across the river and you're chatting and you're talking, and you're spending time after hours at campsites talking to people, getting to know the other teams and their strategies. So we're sitting there and we're doing all of our strategizing, and a lot of this too, there's a show going on. So you've got production stuff that you're doing. And then to come back from that, to find that your sleeping bags are gone, on top of just having to deal with Jordan going out, Paul leaving, it felt like just one thing after another for Don and I. And obviously Don's irate. I have a long fuse on stuff like that. And I go into the analysis mode to say, okay, we're going to figure this out. And immediately we march to Charlie. You can see it in their eyes. They were not responsible for that. They were just as horrified of the notion. And again, it's kind of the idea of, you remove that out there, everybody's going through the same level of suffering with the elements. Yeah. And to kind of take that from somebody, you saw how Charlie team reacted. They're like, oh my gosh, it's low, man. And I think that's probably what bothered us the most about it, is that felt like a cheap move, in the sense that there's a lot of things that draw you away from camp. We're not guarding it militaristically. And you're doing all of that stuff only to come back and see somebody had taken advantage of that. And then you set about tracking that person down. Yeah. So we immediately said, okay, well, if I can break the fourth wall for a second, I'm grabbing this trail cam and I'm going to find out what was happening here. So we look at it, we find out, yep, it's Justin in the world's most improvised ghillie suit. And we start tracking him. Now, Dawn, a little background on Dawn. She routinely is out in the wilderness. They manage a ranch in the Canyonlands out in Eastern Washington. She's done things like tracking people and recovery of individuals that go missing. She found his footprints and she tracked him right away. So I took the shoreline, she took the woods, and then we ended up happening upon his raft, scuttled the raft, had this impasse where it's essentially, the idea was, hey, you can have your raft back if we're willing to trade the bags. We've got you. What are we going to do? So we had this standoff that was kind of, like you saw in the show, ended up having his raft scuttled. And then from that point, there's a whole lot of context and things going on, but essentially we're really broke down to two kinds of people in the world: those with rafts and those who swim. And Justin ended up being one of those who swim. And you kind of saw that it's its own sort of punishment to have to hop into Nika River there because, oh boy, that's cold. And to recover from that is no small feat. It's not a hop out of water and you're just rocking and rolling, because we had all gotten wet at some juncture as it relates to that beautiful, terrible river in Nika. But it's a how that all played out. And then for Dawn and I to get back and say, well, this is the hand we're dealt. We have no choice, right? From this point, we're going to have to overcome. And we started putting our heads together on how to survive for multiple days after that point without sleeping bags. The temperatures have dropped since the beginning of the game. It's colder, it's wetter, you're tired and exhausted to the point that you weren't at the beginning. You're losing weight. So the challenge became, well, now how quickly am I going to burn calories? I'm literally staying up all night, shivering and tending a fire to keep it from being evacuated.
Yeah.
So no sleep. You're working with hot rocks. You're creating makeshift sleeping bags and getting creative out there because, like you saw on the show, we said, hey, I don't want to go anywhere. And we're going to adapt and overcome and show people that it'd take more than just losing the sleeping bags to knock us out of the game.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I mean, I think everybody is impressed. I'm sure you've gotten plenty of DMs and comments and stuff about just your perseverance in that moment, because the show, obviously it's an edited show and stuff, and it's designed to make elicit certain emotions at different moments, but I don't think anybody could watch that and not feel sympathy and begin rooting for you immediately at that moment. So I have a couple questions as you were sharing that was sparked for me. So one, did you even conceive of like the sabotage rating possibility? Like, had you thought about guarding your materials, your camp, or anything before that? Was that even on your radar? Because it just didn't seem like there was even whispers of anything like that until it happened.
That one wasn't, not to that extent, especially with how much we all ended up relying on having a sleeping bag in that setting as the game went on, because you started off the game without it. It was something that kind of materialized its way in with more of the supply drops and things like that over time. So you were rewarded for sticking it out further in the game with more supplies, Hunger Games style, right? Yeah. So we had all, persisted to the point where, oh man, now that we've got sleeping bags, it really solves a problem of whether you actually need to stay up and tend the fire all night or not. Because I could wake up the next morning, not worry about freezing out in the middle of the night, start my fire again. We're rocking and rolling for boiling water, cooking, whatever we got to do, right? So it changes the dynamic of the game. We thought about, teams might be coming into your camp and talking about it, but we thought of it more of, how could I start to amass resources and barter, and trade? And maybe there's some people that want some of the things we have, and there's some stuff they have that we need. We weren't thinking about the outright sneaking in while you're indisposed and sabotaging the camp. Again, I would have changed tactically. I would have done a million things differently, knowing that now, because you would protect things. You'd take your sleeping bag with you, your knife, your hatchet, your ferrocerium rod, the things that you literally depended upon. There's a lot of stuff that, hey, if you steal a tarp, okay, we'll figure it out. Hey, you steal, something that we made, makeshift net. There are a lot of things you can bounce back from. Sleeping bag is high on the list for putting you much closer to out of the game for medical reasons. And then having to go to the mental space where you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, knowing every single night you are going to suffer more so than the other teams are. I really, in my wildest imagination, because there are just certain things from a survivalist ethos that you don't think somebody else is going to do. But again, from a strategic standpoint, I see how you could start to rationalize something like that and think about it as a lever you could pull, especially if you're really wet, you're really hungry, you're really wanting to get out of there sooner rather than later. I can absolutely see how you can get to do it. The question is, do you go to the level where you say, I am willing to do that to somebody else to further myself in the game? And that's something that, even though we even talked about, like, okay, how do you respond to something like this? We can never get over that hump.
Yeah. So that's my next question. I know I messaged you this because it was a question that people were asking me, as kind of someone in this reality TV expert space. They were asking me about violence. They were asking me about, can you physically defend yourself? I mean, it's not you, but you see at one point Javier, wrestling with members of Alpha over stuff. And there is a looming, I think, subtext of what's going to break out here. And I'm sure, getting to talk with you, anybody who's been listening to this point, I'm sure that was not, like something that you're thinking you're trying to resort to by any means, but just like, what were the options as far as like defending your camp or defending yourself?
Very minimal. In fact, one of the rules, like you kind of seen, we've hinted at or talked about in these interactions, there is no laying hands on anybody else in any forceful manner. It would be assault, right? And it would be grounds for removal from the game or prosecution if the other party wanted to pursue it. So, it created this interesting loophole where once you kind of discover that nuclear option, as I've dubbed it, is a possibility and you have very little recourse besides, I joke, storing up all of your worldly possessions and then just laying on it like a greedy dragon. That's the only other answer, right? You can't take it if I'm laying on it. It really created this kind of devolution, if you will, of the strategy, because now all of a sudden that's an option. It's like, oh man, I can't do anything about it. And just like Javier, he couldn't just take his things back, or like in the real world, there's always the rebuff or bluff that you have to call of potential recourse from another human being. In this setting, if you wanted to stay in the game, that's not possible. And if you don't want to be prosecuted for assault, of course, nobody wants to attack anybody. At least I would hope not. So you're kind of left standing there saying, okay, is this, it's really easy to kick sand in somebody's fire and to throw their stuff in the water, right? When there's no retribution or risk to you for doing that, you only stand to gain. So it created this really fascinating, unforeseen malincentive, right? That we all wrestled with as we watched it unfold, to say, every cell in my body wanted to retaliate. It wanted to get after, say, if I want to plant my raft on the beach and walk over there and put an end to this in some way, shape, or form, whatever I have to do. Do I have to pick up the raft and drag it away? Do I have to go grab Javier and his stuff and put him on my shoulders and wade across the river? You want to do something, but you have to make that decision, and I pose this question, do you feed that wolf in your life, or do you choose to reflect a higher ideal? And that's what I think makes this series just transcend survival reality TV. We had to all contemplate and wrestle with who we would become and what we were willing to rationalize or do in the auspices of what the game was presenting us and how it had evolved or devolved in that scenario. And it's fascinating. Fascinating.
No, absolutely fascinating. Definitely. I think, in these reality competition TV shows, again, as somebody who consumes many of them, there are somewhat fabricated ethical dilemmas. And, like there's Survivor and, there's Blind Sides and people. And I don't know if you watch that show, but what that's become is it's like poker. Everybody understands going out there that you're going to lie, that you're going to manipulate. When it first started, that was not, that when it was really just people determining what the show was going to become. And there was less structure. There was a lot more, it was a lot more personal, because people chose that option when it wasn't presented them. They created that option. And so I think a lot of people who, like me, are hardcore reality TV fans really feel like this feels like a fresh reality TV show, because the ethical dilemmas are real and not fabricated to just, produce some shallow drama or anything. Like the suffering of what was caused to you was very real. And no matter what, even if it was for the game or whatever, that there's absolutely like a real ethical dilemma in what you're willing to do, if you're willing to do that to somebody else. So,
yes. Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. I mean, you think about that, you're at this confluence where those choices result, like you said, in real physical consequences for another human being. In an environment that trying, that difficult, in a setting where if you're willing to do that, to push them out of the game, daring them to to cause that kind of downward vicious cycle of tit for tat retaliation, seeking vengeance, revenge, and in whatever equal and opposite capacity it would happen to be. It becomes a real question of, are you willing to do that? Secondly, when are you as a human being required to start to draw that line from a morality standpoint between rationalization for the game all in good fun and gameplay and strategy and yada yada, to no, I'm literally authoring the suffering of someone else, especially if they're committed to trying to overcome it, and really thinking about it from that perspective. That goes back to like the sleeping bag question. We were committed, like, oh, we're just gonna have to get it out and figure it out. It's tough, rough, but we're gonna do what we can to survive. But the other side of it that I think is equally interesting and frustrating, and what really was at the heart of Dawn and I's decision towards when we decided to step away and really let our flares do the talking. It was the fact that tactic devolved the strategy to be a sort of cheap or least common denominator, no recourse. Hey, I'm going to do this. Are you willing to be that petty, mean, that sort of thing, for what was happening with Javier? When you watch it, when you know that that's an option and you pull that lever, you can't put that genie back in the bottle.
Yeah.
And for us, it changed the flavor of the game altogether, because it wasn't about strategy anymore at that point. It was about, one, for me, disrespectful from the standpoint of people gave up their livelihoods to come out and do this. Seth, he quit his job to come out there and do this. There are people that they're giving up time with their families, their livelihoods, financially. They're giving up all of this to come out and pursue this dream, to answer that question personally.
Yeah.
Who would I become in this setting, and what can I do, and can I survive, and can I make it on a team? And then to have that kind of cut off at the knees by those tactics was really one. It was shocking for a lot of us, and you saw that shock across, Dawn and I, of course, and Javier, but Charlie team too. They're looking at it saying, "Oh my gosh, what is that? How's that changed the tenor of the game?" And I think it did. After that entire climax of episode 5 into episode 6, where Dawn, Javier, and I's kind of arc and what we decide to do with that morality question comes to a conclusion. It's fascinating how the game's kind of tenor changed from that point. It's almost like everybody just needed a break.
Yeah.
That, an emotional kind of like, oh, we got to just breathe for a second.
Yeah.
Because the implications and seeing the reaction of people watching it and hearing a very consistent theme of folks that said, my gosh, I had to either step away, or really bothered me to watch that as a viewer, to go through, see what everybody was going through, watch how that tactic felt like it was just so cheap compared to ingenious survival, strategically positioning, alignments of teams and shifting of alliances, like you would see that would be kind of in the realm of gamesmanship. It felt like we stepped into a different arena altogether.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I'm sure. And the question as well that comes up is, was there a set amount of days that you thought you would be out there? Because you hear Jill in one of her interviews in confessionals, and she's sharing to the camera like, this could go on for months. Was that, were you prepared to be out there for months and months? Because I think the entire show wrapped up in a little bit over a month. But did you understand that? Because again, I know you were given very minimal rules, so I just would love to know, in your mindset, how much were you thinking when you're thinking of like, okay, this is what this is going to become? Is this going to be days, weeks, months of this?
Exactly. I think if the game took its turn and we knew, hey, there's only a week and a half left, I think you find a way to gut it out, right? But from our perspective, we literally thought the game could go on. I mean, it could be 80, 90 days. Who knows? It could be like an episode of, like a season of Alone, it open-ended. It's if we're willing to just be out there until everyone gives up or capitulates, or there's some sort of ultimate final challenge like they ended up doing. We didn't know. We had no idea. We knew that all of it was a possibility.
Yeah.
And I do, looking back on it, you could probably look at it and say, okay, there are ways I can start to buffer myself against those strategies, knowing that there's a very real expiration point on the amount of time that you're going to have to be out there. But when it's open-ended, knowing that that's how the game is played from this point onward, and you have to decide, am I going to eat, am I going to devolve or just be subjected to that abuse constantly? And do I have the dignity to say, you know what, no, that's not what I signed up for. I came out here to survive, and under our auspices to work as a team, to get creative, to overcome. For me, especially as an engineer, survival, what's such a draw about the visceral thrill of survival is that it's a problem to be solved. It's critical thinking. It's ingenuity at its finest and most visceral and pertinent, because you have to or you won't. It's what it boils down to. And when that was kind of taken away, when that was taken out of the driver's seat from my perspective, it just changed the reason I came onto the game in the first place.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's helpful. Again, context. I mean, it's hard to know with such little structure exactly how you were thinking about things, because we want to make sure that we're on the same page about the rules as we're watching, and that was definitely a little bit unclear. But I do not blame you for ultimately deciding to shoot your flare. Just you get to the point where you're not going to give into that mutually assured destruction track. And so you and Don both in solidarity do it. So then what happens exactly when you shoot your flare? Like, I would love to know even just the process of exiting the game, because I'm sure that's its whole experience in and of itself.
Well, you talk about the ultimate in emotion, and again, not the amount of an emotional send off that we had between Don and I. Javier and I had gotten close through that time as we were strategizing about merging our camps and teams and getting to spend more time with one another in and around before that final day where everything went down, and the season that series kind of climaxed at that point for all of us. That you talk about an emotional send-off, because you build relationships not just with one another, but with the crew, with production, with medical, with the Bear Guard folks. And these are people that you respect immensely, and they're coming over to you and giving you hugs, and people are crying, and you're just talking about, like, wow, you're hearing things like, man, it takes so much heart to choose that route of integrity in the face of basically at the destruction of everything you gave up to come out and play the game, at your chance at the prize, at your chance at answering the question, are you going to outlast everybody else, at what you gave up at home, the time I gave up away from my beautiful wife and my incredible children and my work and my friends and my family. All of that comes to a head in this moment where you're handed that flare gun. You load a flare for yourself, you load one for Dawn, and you have to sit there and look at it and say, man, this is such a poignant, powerful, emotionally overwhelming moment to point that thing up in the air and fire it. And then wonder, how's everybody else going to feel about that? And what did what we do resonate in the way that it resonated with us? Yeah. And that moment, my gosh, there are very few, especially as it relates to the game, that was just a powerful outpouring of just gratitude, regrets, a little bit of relief, but just sitting there and having all of that come to the head with something so mundane, like just grabbing this flare gun and firing it into the air, and everything it represented. Just an incredibly powerful, clarifying moment. And for us, it talk about what a crazy and just wild and incredible cherry on top of what had been a tumultuous week or so for Don and I.
Yeah. No, I'm sure the catharsis you experience, and then you get a full meal. I'm sure pretty quickly there, and you're sleeping in your bed that night. That's got to be quite the 180 from or a full range of emotions, I'm sure. As we begin to wrap up here, I would love to know, like, with the cast, with Alpha, are you on good terms with them? I'm sure a lot of people are very curious about that. What are your feelings now, having watched the show, particularly towards the Alpha team, and again, their decisions to really, come for you and expedite your exit out of the game here?
Yeah. No, I think if anybody's seen how I approach the game, my superpower is a foundation that just transcends circumstance. And it's this idea that I am incredibly, impossibly serious about the idea that everyone was forgiven immediately always, full stop, no questions. And I've had those interactions with Jill, with Amber, with Justin, and we're all on good terms. I think for a number of reasons. One, what the lost art that we need more of in society is the fact that we can value one another without embracing one another's values. Right? That is possible, folks. It's not a Hegelian dialectic, this or that. You know, you're either can't forgive them, they're bad, and you're good, or vice versa. No, I can understand why somebody would interpret the ambiguity the way that they did. I can empathize with that. Would I do it to another human being? Of course not. You know, and I vehemently disagree with that. And it did. It caused Dawn and I some real suffering. No questions asked. But I don't hold it against them. I don't have any animosity or bitterness about the whole thing. In fact, we're all in connection. We're all wishing each other well. And we all have that shared respect for the fact that we had to go through this incredible crucible experience together. We all processed it in different ways. We all had a different route to getting what meaning was for us out there. And I wouldn't change what Dawn and I did at all. Tactically, I do a million things differently, but yeah. from an integrity and a strategy, just a strategic, the arc of who we are as people and how that came across, I wouldn't change it for anything. And that translates in my relationship with Alpha Team. You know, I've messaged them multiple times. We've talked. We all continue to be really cordial and supportive of one another because it's a very difficult experience no matter what.
Of course.
But again, the how polarizing it can be relative to how it was out there versus how it's portrayed, you know, that's tough for everybody. So I empathize with not only what we were going through out there and the struggles and things that we dealt with. I empathize with Jill and Amber and Justin's experience as well.
Well, that's great to hear. And I have a few rapid fire questions here for you as we wrap up that I received from people. So one, if there is a season 5 and it's Outlast All-Stars, and they call you and say, hey, Joel, you're coming out with us, or do you want to come out with us for All-Stars? Would you be interested?
The adventurer in me says, absolutely, sign me up, give me another shot, let's go. I'm on the plane to Juneau right now. Okay. And that's the other thing, you know. Now the flip side of that, the harder question is whether or not I'm in a position or place where it makes a lot of sense for my family and I spending more time away from my wife and kids. That is the absolute hardest. And I joked with the producers. I go, you guys were filming the wrong thing. The real survival was happening back home with my wife versus 3 children, twins that are 3, and my youngest that was 1 at the time.
Wow. Yeah. That's I just became a father. I have a newborn here. I can't even imagine twins, throw on top of that another child and doing it by yourself. So yeah, kudos to her. That's
she is the MVP in this situation. That's for sure.
Okay. Another question though I have for you is would you ever be interested in a different type of reality competition show? So there's shows like The Traders or things like that pull from other, you know, reality shows, different different, you know, contestants, or The Challenge is another one. And you know, is there anything like that you would be interested in, you know, participating in?
Oh my gosh. You know, for me, that the outpouring of love and support and the doors that are opening because of everything that's happened on Outlast has been incredible. If I were to be blessed with an opportunity like that down the road, I think I'd be hard pressed to not consider it very, very seriously, because it just seems, again, what a ton of fun. I'm a big advocate for adventure readiness, this idea that we create this opportunity surface area in our life by saying yes to these sorts of things. And I would absolutely be considering something like that. And especially knowing that even though, again, depending on the show, depending on the format, depending on where I'm at with my wife and my kiddos, they are also my biggest fans. So they had half the time where my wife was like, you got to go do this when Outlast came out. And she knew what she was getting into. And she says, you got to go do it. It's once in a lifetime thing. Who knows what doors this will open. So I think, it'd be hard pressed to not look at that and say, wow, what a blessing to consider these other opportunities.
Okay, great. And now here's so again, qualified, it works out with your family, timing, all that stuff. This is the real question that people want to know. If it is another Outlast season, but it is you and Jill, on the same team, would you go out there again? That is the question that I'm getting. Is people, does that change the calculus?
Well, I think it does. And here's the other thing. It would be fascinating, right? Because I would have no problem trying to collaborate with Jill on a team. And in fact, I think it would be a really interesting challenge for both of us to say, how can we amplify the best of one another? And who knows, maybe that would emerge as this incredible super team where we decide not to go the route that was chosen the first time around and really lean into the superpowers that Jill has as an incredible survivalist and just rough, tumble, rugged adventurer that she is. Maybe we'd be a force to reckon with. So, for me, you don't know until you're out, until you try it. And as far as people, we all deserve more, way worse than we get in life. And we all deserve a second chance on that front. So heck, if it were, hey, Joel and Jill dropped in on some sort of Outlast dual super team to try to yin and yang it out there. Boy, that would be some must-see television, I think.
Yeah, I think you'd have a lot of people signing up to watch that for sure. Okay, another question I have here is just if for another season, if it was going to happen, and there was, if they consult you, they say, hey Joel, you talked a lot about game theory here. Is there anything we should do to change the rules for season 2? Is there anything that's clear to you that should be different, that might maybe help somebody that was in the same position as you, or protect against some of these things that we said were kind of loopholes?
Yeah. I think now that we've kind of broken the seal on what's possible in the game, even if they showed up and they didn't change any of the rules, it's going to fundamentally change how players protect their camps, how they strategize about resources and different things, how they think about interacting with the other camps and keeping that, it's going to add a layer of I think, even more skepticism in dealing with folks out in that environment. So if they did nothing on that front, absolutely nothing, I think it did fundamentally change the game and the tenure, really the tenor of the whole thing as it relates to strategy already. But if it were me, and you start to think about the game theory of this, we have an opportunity with Outlast to really explore not only just something that's wildly entertaining and explore the man versus wild survival component, but the social experiment side of this is infinitely interesting and infinitely moldable into a number of different scenarios. I would encourage or create incentive structures in the game where you create more risk for somebody to behave that way. Whether it's, hey, you can do it, you're welcome to try, but if you get stopped or you get scuttled, here are the consequences. You lose what you stole, or hey, you get some sort of disadvantage. You have to go to or you lose some other resource that you have at camp, or there's some aspect where there's a counterbalance to choosing something that's a little more morally fraught or questionable. That's like, oh, look, if you can go ahead and do it and you overcome the odds or the incentives that are stacked against you to accomplish it, maybe you are rewarded because the risk is balanced. That would be fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think that seems like a interesting, because I don't think anybody who's, again, a hardcore reality competition show wants a bunch of more structure and rules, because that was what made the show so fascinating, was really putting you all in that position and asking that question, what will you do? And so I hope, if producers are listening to this interview, I hope you don't change too much. But I do think, like you're saying, there needs to be a little bit of a shift in incentives, and just to give you some like recourse, as you were discussing. So I'm very interested. I hope there is a season 2 Outlast. And if there is, Joel, this is my invitation to you. If you ever want to come in and provide commentary on a season 2, Silent Podcast is happy to help you host that. We would love to, we're hoping for a season 2, and if there is, we would love to talk with you again sometime.
Oh my goodness, I would be all ears, and I would love to talk about it. And again, like you said, it is truly nuanced and something special. So major kudos to Grant and the production team for coming up what I think is just such a refreshing take on this. Infinitely fascinating. It brings the moral question, the philosophical question, the theological question. I mean, it is just causing conversation that if we were just a bunch of people starving in the woods for 80 days, you're not going to have that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
So it is truly special, and I would love to keep talking about it. That's for sure.
Well, sounds good. Well, Joel, is there anything else you'd like to say before we're out here? I know we're pushing the hour mark and you got to get going, but I just wanted to, ask if there's anything left that you would like to share with, our audience here.
Yeah, I would say if you are at all interested in keeping up with what adventures are next for Joel, your favorite Outlast outcast, or any of me and my compadres, check it out, joelhungate.com. You can find out all of that. Connect with me on social. It's usually just Joel Hungate, whether it's Instagram, TikTok. This is Hungate on Twitter. Connect with me. Keep the conversation going. In fact, I have a commitment I've responded to, and I've tried because the messages have been insane, and the quality and quantity of them has been overwhelming. But I'm trying to respond to everyone and everything at all places at all times. So you got questions, hit me up, guys. I want to talk about it, and I'm so excited for where this is going to go, what's going to happen next. And so thankful for your time today, Josh.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're very, very grateful that you took the time here to take a deep dive into everything that happened on this incredible show. So I will call my shot. I think this is going to keep trending on Netflix. I think it's your run as a top 10 show in the US is not going to be over. I think we're going to keep seeing it pop up in that list over time, because this show has spread like wildfire through word of mouth, just within my own network here, and people are fascinated. People are really interested to see this kind of fresh social experiment that, again, is so rare. So once again, thank you, Joel. As always, for anybody listening, please subscribe to Silent Podcasts. We may be having some more interviews like this with other members of your season here. And we would love, any reviews, ratings helps us to just get the word out for interviews like this to get in those algorithms so people can hear the perspective and experience from contestants like Joel. So we have some other interviews up from other shows as well. So if you're into competition reality shows, please check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts and consume your media. So thank you all again. Thank you, Joel, for your time, and we will see you on the other side.
Very good. Stay wild, everyone.